Game 11 of the 2024 World Chess Championship between Gukesh and Ding just concluded. Let me go ahead and take you through exactly what we just saw. So, once again, and I continue to be impressed by this, we had another fresh opening. This has made, for me personally, despite the number of draws so far, it's made the World Championship very intriguing to watch. First move, knight f3. Now, in this competition, this is a move that has been seen, but after the move d5 by Ding, Gukesh comes out with the move c4. Now, this move without the move d4 first or even e3 certainly encourages d4. If you think about it, after d4, let's say that we see the move e3 here, c5. If you know your pawn structures, then you'll realize that this right here, this is actually the Benoni with colors reversed. So this is an opening that usually black plays, and for example, the position that we're looking at right here is one that black usually has. Now, with the extra tempo, it's definitely very playable, but there's something extra that is playable by white here, which Gukesh goes for. So using that, the fact that white has an extra move to his advantage to the fullest, we see him play the move b4. Usually, if this opening was being played properly, from the other side, let's say this d4 move would actually be d5 by white, then the move c5 would already be played. So b4 is a move that's only possible because Gukesh is playing this opening from the white side. So he has that one extra move that you don't usually have in this opening. So the move b4, very interesting. It stops c5, and whether or not it stops it permanently, at the very least, b4 is playable right now because c5 is not there. And we get another very interesting position. Super double-edged, I would say. In terms of a world championship match, I cannot imagine that this has been played before. I think, as we've talked about, Gukesh continues to assume risk in this match. And we're seeing a lot of, even thinking back to the very first game, we had the French. There are a lot of openings being used here, and as I keep reiterating, that's what's keeping it interesting for me. c5 played anyway. You're like, okay, great, that speech didn't matter. Well, it actually does, because instead of taking, or maybe instead of having the pawn being taken here, white continues with e3. Now, the main purpose of this move is, let's say black captures. Of course, you're not going to capture on c5. You're going to lose the f2 pawn. I mean, this is crazy. But you're also not going to capture like this, because now the queens are going to get traded. You're going to drop your pawn on b4. And with the queens off, this is just senseless. Black is much better. So the whole purpose of this is actually f takes e3 and then d4. So this is usually how this opening gets played. White gets like a pretty big center, maybe later even continues with the move a3 to complete the gambit. And just look at black's pieces. You can see where the compensation lies here, because black spent all the time winning that one pawn that they're ahead right now. So the move e3 is packed with a ton of poison. Black decides to respond with knight f6. Not interested in the variation that we just went over, which, by the way, the engine, of course, being up a pawn there, thinks black's doing totally fine. But I feel like in practice, especially in a world championship match where you can assume your opponent has a lot of preparation, it's like basically you versus the computer at that point for the opening phase. That's not very exciting as a prospect. All right, so a3. Defending the pawn, very simple move. Bishop g4. White decides to take and follow up with the very logical h3. Now, if the bishop retreats, remember, we're in the type of position, looking at how white's playing, where I think you guys can imagine that the move g4 would be very tempting here. And I don't think black is that interested in allowing it. So white could play bishop to b2. White could go for g4. But it does feel like, you put your bishop on g4, not just to pin it, but to eventually capture. Because keeping this pin, it can always be broken, which means your d-pawn can be lost really at any moment. Knight c6 is not a reliable way to defend, with the move b5 happening whenever white wants. And of course, keep in mind that the e-pawn could just drop after maybe g4 and knight takes e5. So the point with Ding's play is, yeah, I want to take that right away. That way my d-pawn is not a concern anymore. Queen c7, guarding the b-pawn. Also hitting the c-pawn in case white wants to fianchetto, but this is really irrelevant. It's more just to defend this one. Okay, d3, we see a5 and b5. Now a5 is a really nice move, phenomenal. Here it happens to be great as well in this particular position, but the theme of a5 against this pawn right here is really felt because the rook on a1 is not defended. So if white's bishop were on b2 already, the move a5 would certainly be decent, but it wouldn't be amazing because you're not threatening anything down the a file. Not quite. So this, whenever the rook's not defended, is really nice because let's say bishop b2 were played now. So now at least this would be very forcing, and with this pawn loose, black's probably going to play e5, or maybe one of these knight moves, like for example even knight a6. Probably e5 makes the most sense to guard the pawn and threaten this with check. And obviously there's a problem here with the rook on a1 being recaptured by the bishop. After e5, the bishop is just staring at nothing. This is threatened with a check on b4. So it's just a really nice move to play when you see the rook's not defended, because white really only has one option, or they need to keep things closed, but they have to play this, and you can just visually see how that creates an amazing square for the knight. So what would have been a rather sad developing move, knight c6, I think black is just worse here. There's no way around it. White's just going to develop like this. The pawns look amazing, and don't forget white has the two bishops. So that would have been a little bit sad, but a5 carves out a beautiful square on c5. And although white goes for this anyway, by the way, Gukesh going for this, I don't know if this was all prep. I'm very curious to hear. But for me, Ding getting the knight to c5 here looks to me like a very satisfying position. I would be happy here playing Ding's position so far. But clearly Gukesh, was willing to take on the risk here. And while we've been breezing through these moves, I wanted to point out that after the move a5, and this would not surprise me, Ding is the one way down on time, right? They start at 2 hours. He's got less than an hour here. For Gukesh, he's clearly in his opening preparation. He's got 1 hour and 56 minutes, so he's barely used any time. This has been the theme throughout the entire match. It's been Ding that's been way lower on time, so we're not surprised to see this, but also the nature of the opening, as I said, probably never been seen before in a World Championship match. Very unique opening, and definitely one that Ding is probably very surprised by. However, this move g3, we can see here, based on the time usage, took Gukesh 1 hour to play. I don't know if that's the single longest think in the World Championship match, in this one. Certainly, I'm sure there's been longer in history, but it is the best move. It is a good move. I still think that an hour on this indicates something. Gukesh is clearly out of his preparation. He's trying to remember things. Maybe G3 is accompanied with, oh yeah, I had this analyzed, but I just needed to remember it. But a 1 hour think means we're probably on our own here. And boy, did we have an exciting middle game to just jump into. Bishop G2, knight to D7, intending for sure the move knight E5, and it was played. Queen F4. So Ding plays knight D7, knight E5, which looks phenomenal, right? We're forking the queen and the D3 pawn. Instead of that, believe me, a move like E5 was possible, and maybe in hindsight, Ding goes back and says, oh, okay, maybe that would be the one to do because it's less risky. And the position that Ding is about to get in the middle game with this pin is maybe one that he comes to regret. So E5, bishop to D6, castles. This is a really simple plan. I'm actually not sure if white has an advantage here or can even play for an advantage. At some point, there will be a knight b3 move. Knight b3 is always on offer. So I think pretty much here, as soon as we see the move bishop g2, the move knight to b3 needs a mention. I mentioned it there after the move e5, but here it clearly is the same problem. Whenever you're playing knight b3, it's a discussion of, do I care about queen takes b7? And the answer is usually yes, you do. Okay, hitting the rook. So obviously taking this is just not worth it. You need to play rook b8, it seems. Okay, bishop c6, and the king has to move, or knight d7. It really doesn't matter. Once again, we have bishop f4 at the end. White continues to make threats and get out of things while losing the most important pawn in the position on b7. So it really doesn't make a lot of sense. However, Ding could play rook a7. And after this check, the king moves, or knight d7. And at this point, white would just happily sacrifice the rook after winning that pawn. And you have the pawn that you won. You have two connected pass pawns. You have a hanging pawn in the center, and you have the bishop pair. I think this is more than enough compensation. The engine surely agrees. And this is why Ding is just absolutely not considering the move knight b3. But as I said, the move e5, Ding may have come to prefer that, but we've seen that Gukesh is willing to take on risk. So, you know, he's playing a position where knight b3 is in the air constantly, where knight e5 and the d3 pawn, I mean, look, it's indefensible. None of these pieces can defend the d pawn here. So he just castles. And queen f4. And I'm like, what the heck is going on watching this? I didn't really understand. First thing that comes to mind is, what about knight takes d3? But you have to look at the nature of the position. The position is starting to open up. Okay? The bishops are going to thrive in a position like that. And meanwhile, well, black's not castling queenside, and he's 1, 2, 3 moves away from a kingside castle. That's a lot. That really is a lot. Now, I was looking at this position, and after the move queen e4, knight c5, queen takes d4 was recommended. I'm barely understanding this, even when I was looking with the engine. So rook d8 was the move played, but knight takes d3. First of all, queen takes d4 can be played, and I would almost expect it. But queen e4 as a move is quite tricky to understand. It seems silly, like black goes back with the knight. Isn't that what the knight would want to do? The queen takes, but all of white's counterplay, from what I'm understanding, seems to be based off of the move b6. The knight wants to go into the center. In this case, without the d pawn, the knight wants to go into the d5 square. b6 just to open the b file and clear the b5 square for the knight is the other bit of counterplay. And of course, b6 also has the added benefit that in this current position, it can be played and the queen cannot even take because it has to stay guarding the knight. And of course, just trading these two pawns makes the position more open. Black's multiple moves away from castling, so the open position definitely favors white. So queen f4 played, and well, at this point I definitely thought for Ding we were going to see some sort of e6 move. He's not quite ready to part with the d pawn, so he plays rook d8. Reasonably logical. There is a pin here on this queen, and as we discussed, knight takes pawn. White clearly has a couple decent options to follow that up, although I have to admit I'm still surprised that this wasn't played. Rook d1, and at this point the engine pretty much gives Ding the biggest advantage that I could see in this game. And this is what I meant when I was saying, like, not only is Gukesh playing very risky, but I did make a prediction that, you know, oh, we were going to see the match end before the, you know, in regulation, before the tie breaks, just because time and time again we're seeing big advantages. You know, Gukesh is taking on serious risk, and one of them tends to be much better or much worse at some point. We've seen Gukesh be on, honestly, the more favorable side of those advantage swings way more than Ding. So this was yet another one. Rook d1 was played, and Ding in this position could just play sort of the simple e6. That's kind of what the engine likes. b6, as I mentioned, you know, the knight can swing into b5. It cannot be taken. so the queen has to go somewhere. And I don't know, maybe we see a4 and the knight to a3, knight b5, but it's quite slow. Black will get the pieces developed by then. And meanwhile, the d3 pawn can not only just be taken with this knight anymore, but it can actually be taken with the e knight now that there's no pin. And a queen exchange looks like it would do a lot of good for Black's position. So it looks very tough to defend. Like, how are you defending this pawn? It's pretty much impossible. Not a single piece can help out with that. Bishop f1 is a massive concession, taking the only piece you have that's actually developed and putting it back on f1. Surely not going to be played. So I was looking at this e6 move as a must do for Ding. Instead, Ding actually comes up with g6, which looks like a good move, but is a tad too slow. And I think Gukesh starts to get optimistic once again. I don't know how his body language was or how he was feeling, but based on the time usage, he actually has lower time than Ding now. My prediction was that he's not enjoying this position. That's what I would guess. G6 was played. Now the idea clearly is to kick the queen out with bishop h6. Not just kick it out, but actually nearly trap it. So it's quite a big move, big deal. We see a4. Gukesh looks unbothered. h5 and then b6. So this is the reason why bishop h6 is not a huge problem. Queen d6 played, ignoring it, and then we see bishop a3. So this move right here is the reason that Gukesh is not scared of bishop h6. It was played anyway, bishop h6, but after bishop takes the knight, finally, even though giving up the bishop pair is quite significant, Gukesh finally gets rid of that amazing knight, centralizes the queen, and I think from this moment on, we basically get to see that whoever gains any slight advantage, that advantage is going to be magnified because we have opposite bishops. So if Black ends up with a better position, the problem is Black is going to be able to control all these dark squares, and White is not going to be able to contribute with this piece right here. And vice versa. Right? If White has the advantage, there's going to be lots of pressure on the light squares that the dark square bishop is not going to be able to help out with. And that's precisely what we're seeing here. The engine is preferring White. Black went for this, did not trap the queen, was not successful. White has managed to not only retain the d pawn, which is a miracle, the two knights were there, not only keep this pawn, but play b6, and fix the b pawn on b7, which is very tough to defend here. So knight c6, and have a look at the moves that Gukesh plays from here, because they're very simple and they're very scary. Right, knight c6 to guard the pawn. This is defend. Everything looks defended here. Okay, knight a3. The idea being maybe knight b5, but really we're going rook b1, rook b5. This is actually what you have to watch out for. Why rook db1? We have to defend the knight here, so that's a must. And the rooks are most likely going to double anyway, so that's all right. If I do nothing, I'm just going to castle bishop g7 just to show what White's up to. Okay, very clear. We go here. The queen needs to move. We go here. The queen needs to move. You can see how all the pieces are just jumping to squares that they would like to be on. White can move the queen out of the way, maybe take the knight. This knight's coming to take the a pawn. And this bishop is not participating. So it just feels like White is attacking with an extra piece. Now, obviously, I made some sluggish moves for Black there. Let's play higher quality moves, maybe ones that Ding is coming up with. Rook d7, guarding the pawn so that the knight on c6 can actually consider moving. Okay, knight c2. Queen takes b6. Now, why was this played? Well, once again, we're faced with a similar problem. Rook to b5 is coming. This bishop is doing a whole lot of nothing. And meanwhile, this bishop is exercising its full potential on the long diagonal. So Ding finally decides to take the pawn, which is the decision he made rather quickly, but the move rook d7 did take some time, so he probably gave quite a bit of consideration to knight c2 already. So even though it's a quick move, I'm sure it was well thought out, because you do not make that move lightly. Even though White is down the pawn, let's remember White is playing a Benoni structure with the white pieces. Okay, that Benoni structure, it has, you know, it's kind of the cousin of the Benko gambit with the moves b4 and a3. Those positions are meant to be played down a pawn. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. Look how easy this is to play. Rook b1, rook b5. We got the other rook doubling. Maybe the move c5 if needed, but that alone is going to make, well, very, very serious threat. Okay, castles, and I was actually surprised by knight a1. Look, the move rook to b1 seems like, you know, how do you not play a move like this? Now, black has many options. You know, you could think about bringing the knight back even, but it's very passive. Rook b8. White's down a pawn here. It hardly feels like it. At this point, maybe continuing with that knight a1 move. From a practical perspective, I was a big fan of knight a1 because it was activating that remaining piece. But the engine does prefer the simple rook to b1, and then something like queen e2 to have the bishop always be prepared to take on c6, and then the a pawn would be dropping after that. Maybe you could target this pawn. Personally, though, Gukesh seems to have a very good grip on, like, I do think he has a good understanding of which moves would be challenging for the opponent to face, especially given the time trouble, and him being able to assume a little bit more risk for a much higher reward. And I think he's been doing that all match. Now, it hasn't been successful. We've seen a lot of draws. We've seen some bad positions, but he's definitely shown that he's willing to continue to give in order to potentially get a lot in return. And knight a1 kind of reminds me of that. This move is not the best objective move. The engine is not a big fan of it, but with time ticking down, I think he just estimated that the knight on b3 would be very tricky to handle because b6 is not a comfortable move, and otherwise, a knight on c5 is not a comfortable piece. So black has a difficult decision that they need to make. Rook b8 played, knight b3, and he's not only just going to double the rooks, but he's all about bringing the knight to c5 as the main problem. And he identifies this as a maneuver that will be tough to deal with. Look at this bishop. It is not participating in the action. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 against 4. I know the bishop, you know, looks like it's keeping things balanced, but no, it's really a non-participant in this game. e6, knight to c5. How do you stop it, right? b6 is not playable. Moving the knight pretty much feels like it's not an option. Let's say knight a7 was played. The white rook needs to move, but the a pawn can just be taken. Rook c5 can be played, right? There are many options. So you're also giving back the material like that. e6 looks reasonable, but you're one move too late. If bishop to f8 could be played, you'd be stopping knight c5, but of course Gukesh saw that that was not possible. I was thinking that after knight b3, maybe you could consider the move rook d6, trying to actually play b6 next. But even though this move does kind of deal with knight c5, the knight can show up there anyway, and it's not like you can remove it because of knight to b6. So I did not feel that there was an easy answer to this knight c5 idea, and it feels even worse to play this because now the bishop really can't do anything. Whereas at least with e6, you allow knight c5 and you hope that you can remove it right away. But Ding was struggling to deal with just the simple idea of knight c5, and there the rooks get doubled. There's clear pressure here. Ding has now been put in a position with time pressure and from Gukesh's not only interesting opening choice, but constant ability to play moves that might not be the engine best, but put a lot of pressure on the opponent, put Ding in a position where he has to constantly defend. And as I predicted, hasn't come true yet. There's still many games to play, but as I predicted, we were going to see one of these decisive positions, these advantages that both players were getting, we're going to see one of them taken advantage of. And in this position, Ding blunders with queen to c8, a terrible move. It's the end of the game. There's nothing to discuss. After queen takes c6, he resigned. Okay, the game is officially over after this one move. And obviously we have a new leader, Gukesh, in the World Championship. And I might add, not only a new leader, but the first time that he's led in this match, which obviously you can do the thing where you bring up well, it's the first time he's ever led in a world championship match because it's his first match. So congratulations to Gukesh on this very nice game, putting pressure on relentlessly. But this was something I could definitely foresee. Wasn't necessarily going to be for Gukesh, but I just felt like there was too many points of material and advantage, and the engine was just favoring one side or the other in these middle games. Somebody had to cash that in. It was either going to be, Gukesh from a game like this where he just put so much pressure on from the start. Ding fails at being resilient as he has been successfully in the entire match. He's not going to be able to do that forever. Or Ding stays resilient over and over again, and Gukesh gets frustrated, over presses, and that's almost happened in this match. And by the way, there are still games to come, and it can still happen in this match. So while it does feel like, the match is over now, the number one thing I have to remind you is that Ding was faced with this situation in his match against Nepo. He lost, and it just felt like he was down and out. But the one thing I have learned as a commentator, just fan of chess, observer of the match, is you can never count Ding out. He always looks, very forlorn, upset to blunder. It feels like he's so defeated after these games, especially when he loses. But I'm still convinced that that is not the moment that you count out Ding. Any other player, even myself, if I'm looking down after a game, it probably does carry forward into the next game. With Ding, I'm not sure that that is the case. But all that being said, Ding has to win. Doesn't have to be very next game, but he has to win a game of chess, which means you look back on his maybe previous game where he made a draw with the white pieces, and it's so easy to criticize. It's not fair to, because we don't know the result of this game. If Ding had drawn this game and gone on to win in tiebreaks, you would say, okay, yeah, smart. So no one can really foresee the future. Hard to look at that decision and criticize it too much, but I'm sure, based on the fact that he went and lost the very next game, wasting the white pieces like that is not going to look very smart. But now he's going to have to make use of them. He's got the white pieces again in his next game, and he will have another chance in the match as well. There's still some more games to come, but now we have this added dynamic of Gukesh having the lead for the first time in this World Championship match. We have game 12 coming as well, so I will see everyone tomorrow for that recap. But things are heating up. I know people have had their different opinions about whether this World Championship match has been the highest quality of chess, but my strong stance is that the openings have been very enterprising, different, exciting. If you play an opening, you may have seen it in this World Championship match. In previous ones, you pretty much had to play, the top of the top openings in order to see them there. So I think it's been a very exciting match from that perspective. We've also seen a huge fight in terms of, players' technique, nerves, and resilience going head to head against one another. And so far, it's just resulted in draws, but there have been so many advantages and, computer eval swings that I don't think you can complain too much about this match. And now we do see a victory, which means that the remaining games are going to be even more exciting as Ding Liren is in a must-win situation. It does not need to be tomorrow, but it needs to happen in the next couple games or he will lose this match. So congratulations to Gukesh on just relentless pressure. We talk about Ding's relentless defense, but the risk-taking and the pressure that Gukesh puts on in a practical setting using time as well as a weapon has certainly been exciting to watch and made the match very competitive. So I will see everyone for game 12 tomorrow morning, where Ding will have the white pieces and is not necessarily in a must-win situation in that game, but I do not think we will see him making a short draw as he has in the past. See you guys for game 12.